New cars are really expensive. In fact, in the last year, the average new car transaction price has been hovering somewhere around $48,000. But what if I told you that you could get a brand new car for around half that? Now, you might be thinking that a new car for about $25,000 is going to be terrible to drive and pretty much be a last resort. And in many cases, you'd be right. But Kia's new K4 here, which replaces the outgoing Forte, does its best job at convincing you that its low price is more of a coincidence than it is a compromise. For the Consumer Reports Auto Test Program, we bought a 2025 Kia K4 LXS, and it has a 147 2-liter 4-cylinder engine and a continuously variable transmission, or a CVT, and front-wheel drive. The MSRP on this car is only $23,165. The only option we got was carpeted floor mats for $175. A destination fee of $1,155, and the total cost is $24,320. Now, I'm not saying that's not a lot of money, but compared to most new cars, that's a great deal. While the Kia Forte was a totally fine car, it's been slowly working its way down our list of subcompact sedans, basically as other competitors from brands like Honda, Toyota, Mazda, and Subaru get redesigned and get better over time. The Forte provided a lot of features for the money in a pretty good value, but it really stood out most for its really loud cabin and pretty terrible ride quality. The K4 moves to a new platform, and not only does this mean the car grows in length, width, and wheelbase, but it also seems to have allowed Kia engineers to create a much more refined vehicle. And we're gonna get into all of that, but the first way this K4 tries to hide its lower cost is with its exterior design. Now, Hyundai and Kia have been design-driven companies for a while now, and this car, it really shows with the head and tail lights. I mean, just look at these things. They're huge. They stretch from like the fender all the way to the bumper here. Then you have this pretty crazy lighting design in here, so it looks really cool. And there are some other unique details too as you work your way along the side of the car, like this coupe-like roof line that this pillar goes all the way across the car, and it kind of gives this coupe appearance where you don't have that traditional flattened sedan profile in the back. It actually kind of looks like a hatchback, but it has a regular trunk. And you even have the rear door handle that's integrated into the C-pillar area here, which we'll talk more about. And a personal favorite of mine is just the weird approach they took on this rear quarter window. The upper corner here is kind of met with the rear glass, and it's up to you whether you like the look of this, but I think it's regardless unique. One benefit of the K4's new platform and added size is that you have a really good sized trunk for it being a compact sedan. So you open this up and you have a really wide opening and a pretty deep trunk, and of course your seats fold down, so this is going to be a pretty practical storage place. Getting in and out of the back of the K4 is generally pretty simple, but I mentioned that door handle here up on the C-pillar might be a little weird and awkward at first, but once you get the door open, it's a pretty wide entryway. And the only thing to keep in mind here is because this is a small compact sedan, it's pretty low to the ground, which could make getting in and out a little awkward. Once you're in the backseat of the K4, you know, there's nothing crazy going on in here, but it's a pretty nice place, especially for this being a smaller vehicle. I have plenty of leg and knee room here. I'm pretty tall, but I have enough headroom, and the seat is generally pretty supportive. You even got a couple USB ports back here, which is nice. But I think the most interesting detail about this car and the back seat is this handle that they basically have designed here into the back of the front seat, and it's really nice to help you lift yourself out of the car. So once you're inside the K4, its design forward intent really carries through to the inside. There's a couple things that they're doing to try to make this seem a little bit more premium than the price and class of car suggests, and that's the two big displays that are here in front of you on the dashboard, and then also this pretty interesting to look at steering wheel that's squared off on the top and bottom and has these cutouts and just the two spokes here. It's a little bit more special and unique than you might expect at this price. In terms of fit and finish, there of course are a lot of plastic panels in here, as you would probably expect for this type of vehicle in this class, but it's mostly passable, I think, and everything seems to fit together pretty well. But there are two areas where the K4 struggles a little bit more to hide that lower price point, and as nice as I said this steering wheel is to look at, it's really not as nice to hold. It's plastic, it's got that urethane coating on it, so it's not wrapped in leather or something like that. And you know, it's the thing you touch the entire time, hopefully anyway, that you're driving the car. And the other one that kind of drives me crazy personally is the fact that these storage bins are unlined. They don't have any padding material at the bottom. And it's not necessarily unexpected at this price, but this front one in particular, it's really great that it's here, it's large, it's accessible, and that's awesome. But when I'm driving and I have my keys there, with every acceleration or braking or turning motion of the car, you know, front to back, side to side, my keys are just sliding around in there, making noise and banging around, and it drives me crazy. So I would probably be cutting my own bin liners before I even got this car home from the dealership for the first time. Without a doubt, the single weirdest thing about the interior of this car is that the door panels are actually different colors. They're different shades of gray, I guess. And there's actually a line up here on the dash where you have gray on this side and black on this side, and they continued that onto the door panels. So the passenger side has gray on the top, and the driver's side has black on the top. And my wife asked me if maybe they ran out of black door panels in the factory. I don't know, it seems pretty intentional, but I would actually probably understand it more if like one was red and the other was blue, as if they were making some kind of statement. But here it's almost so subtle that I'm not really sure why they went through the trouble to do that, but there you go. You get one black door and one gray door. Looking at the controls in this car, they're pretty simple overall. It's gonna be easy for most people to use this car. You have the pretty standard at this point Kia steering wheel and cluster system here that's generally easy to use. You have good displays there. And this large center display that we talked about is basically just a gateway to Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. There's actually not a whole lot going on with the native system, but if you are going to use your phone and connect it, you've got a big display for that, which is great. Traditional lever style shifter here on the console is easy to use. And in general, I like these climate controls. They're physical buttons, they're pretty simple to figure out, but they are not perfect. So the first thing that's a little weird here is that if you're somebody who likes logic and order, these climate controls are not for you. There are little LEDs here to indicate the temperature from hot to cold, and there's no thermostat. There's not a reading here to tell me like 72 or 80 or whatever. And I don't really understand what the difference between one hot and two hots and three hots are. And there's no middle point either. Like I can't put this as something in the center. So it's just a little strange. And look, it's not that big a deal in the grand scheme of things, but it's a little annoying if you want to be able to dial in this exactly. And because this is not an automatic climate system, the two things that I am dealing with the most are at the opposite end of the spectrum on this climate bar here. So I'm constantly kind of messing here with the temperature over here and then messing with the fan speed over here. And what's really annoying about that is that this fan speed control is completely blocked by the steering wheel when I'm sitting in my driving position. And speaking of controls being blocked, we seem to have entered a world of car design where we've stopped caring if we block things with the steering wheel. And it's not totally unique to Kia, but in addition to the climate control here being blocked, these home and map buttons are completely blocked by the steering wheel for me. And probably worst of all is the headlight icons on the top here, which are showing me the status of my headlights, but more importantly at night, the auto high beam symbol is going in and out. That's completely blocked by the top of the steering wheel. So you can either choose to ignore those things or you have to put the steering wheel in a higher position than you might want. Other than that, the rest of the driving position's pretty good. It's spacious. My knees aren't really contacting any, the hard plastic surfaces here. I have good armrests and good headroom, and it just took me a little bit of time to dial in the seating position. Not only is it a manually adjusted seat, but at first it felt like my legs were a little too close, and because the front of the seat doesn't tip up and down, I felt like I didn't have enough leg support, but I eventually was able to figure out the right position, and generally it's pretty comfortable. So we're out driving the Kia K4 now, and the driving experience is actually an area where it does a good job of convincing you that this car costs a little bit more than it actually does. And what impresses me the most in particular is the NVH performance, or the noise, vibration, and harshness. And even more specifically, the idle performance of this car. So if you're just sitting there and you actually have the transmission in park, climate control off, so you're not masking anything with the sound of the fan, it's incredibly quiet. I mean, you would be forgiven if you thought the car wasn't even running. It's so quiet, and you don't get any vibrations coming through the steering wheel or anything like that. Just feels like they paid a lot of attention to that. and maybe this new platform really allowed them to excel in those areas. And it's really a noticeable improvement over the outgoing Forte. And it's also impressive in other areas too, in terms of wind noise is really well controlled, and you don't get a lot of road and tire noise coming through either. Generally, in terms of being comfortable and quiet, it does a really good job. And along those same lines, the ride comfort is really good too, and definitely a pretty noticeable improvement over the Forte. Some of that's the longer wheelbase that tends to help ride comfort a little bit, but it generally soaks up bumps pretty darn well, and the body stays really controlled too. It's really not until you get over rougher surfaces and really broken pavement where it starts to feel a little bit choppy, and you could be like, okay, this is a lower end vehicle. It starts to feel a little bit unrefined, but for most driving situations, it's pretty comfortable. Other than the idle performance, which is really quiet, the engine's pretty quiet most of the time too, especially below about 3,500 RPM. It's a lot quieter than most 2 liters connected to a CVT transmission, which tend to let the RPMs really flare up and intrude, onto the cabin and the occupants inside. This does still get pretty noisy if you really have to use all the power and rev it out, but again, in most driving situations, it's going to be pretty quiet. The K4 is a pretty good handling car too, and some of that comes from the fact that it's a lightweight car, which generally lends itself to good handling, but beyond that, it turns in pretty well. Steering is relatively quick, body roll is well controlled. And what impresses me in particular is this car has what's referred to as a twist beam rear axle. And this is something that's kind of in between a solid and independent suspension design. It's generally done to save cost, and you tend to get some undesirable handling characteristics with that type of system, but it's really hard to detect here actually. It feels pretty good. It feels like a cohesive driving experience. The front and the back respond in phase with each other, and generally I'm pretty impressed. It's going to take you driving this car pretty hard to notice the fact that it's got somewhat less sophisticated rear suspension. The powertrain in this car is totally serviceable. It works pretty well. It's mostly in the background, and it gets the job done in this car. It's not exactly exciting, and it pretty much carries over from the Forte. But despite this car's added weight and added size, the EPA combined rating actually goes up 1 from 32 to 33, so that's pretty cool. Most of the time, the power delivery is pretty smooth, and sometimes it feels a little inconsistent off the line. There are times where you feel like you have to just keep pressing the accelerator pedal to get the response that you want. It can feel flat-footed, in other words. And then there are other times where you tip in a little bit too much, and the transmission in the powertrain almost responds a little abruptly and gives you more of a jerky response, but that's more the exception than the rule. Generally, it works pretty well. Now, there's a little bit of some weird behavior with this car and the transmission as you're going up and down hills. So you'll notice that the engine RPMs will rise as you're going down a hill, so the car is trying to essentially use engine braking to maintain speed, and that in and of itself isn't too weird, and it is pretty helpful. Where it gets a little bit weird is as you're coming up a hill, basically as the car is anticipating itself going up a grade, it will also raise the RPMs in those situations too. But generally it's in the background, and it doesn't really impede on the driving experience too much. Beyond some of that somewhat strange behavior, Kia tends to make a really good CVT. It feels natural to drive. It's simulating gear changes, so it can, feel like a more conventional transmission at times, and generally it works pretty well. But for as good as this powertrain is, we would love to see Kia bring over the hybrid system, kind of like Hyundai's done with the Hyundai Elantra, which is the sister vehicle to this K4. Outward visibility in the K4 is pretty good. It's nothing spectacular necessarily, and some of that's just because, today this is a lower car on the road. A lot of people are driving SUVs, so you might feel like you're, low down compared to some other cars. But other than that, the A-pillars, even though they come a little bit close to my face, they're pretty slim, and the belt line is pretty low, and you have pretty good sized windows here. And the quarter window out back, with that kind of weird design that we showed on the outside, it lends itself to actually a pretty usable window when you're looking at it from the inside, so that's good. Honestly, the only knock against the visibility in this car is the deck lid in the back, or the area kind of behind those rear seats. It's pretty high, so you end up with a somewhat narrow rear window, but otherwise, visibility, it's pretty good in this car. So that's the review of the brand new Kia K4. Subcompact sedans and entry-level cars like this tend to make their owners deal with some sort of major bummer. We know that the Forte had two pretty big ones, and they often are making excuses for their purchase that end in something like "for the price." But this K4 does a pretty good job of making itself feel more expensive than it actually is. It might not fool you into thinking it's, a $48,000 car, but this isn't just a good car for the class, it's just a good car, period. For more on compact sedans and entry-level cars, visit cr.org.